Welcome to the Maverick Paradox podcast, where we explore what it is to be a maverick and discover effective modes of leadership. I am Judith Germain, and my mission is to propel the maverick mindset into a world where character and integrity will ultimately have a higher premium than personality and bureaucracy. So thank you for joining me on this journey. If you'd like to continue with me, then please subscribe to my podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or one of the other popular podcast platforms. And today, my guest is Patrick Ward. Hi, Patrick.
Hi, Judith. Thanks for having me on.
Yes, I'm really pleased to have you here today. Tell me a bit about you.
I am editor-in-chief at High Speed Experts, and as many of your audience would probably be able to tell, I am Australian, but I'm living in Los Angeles, California, and we've been doing so for the last 3.5 years. So really excited to dive into what it means to be a maverick, particularly for someone like myself who left everything I knew in Australia and made a shot for America.
Wow. So for me, I've kind of defined since around 2005 mavericks to be willfully independent people. So would you count yourself as a maverick?
Absolutely. I think independence was something that was taught to me from such a young age. In fact, when I was 12 years old, my parents said to me, "You will pay for your education, we'll pay for your food, we'll pay for the roof over your head, but if you want anything else, you've got to go out, get a job and find a way to make it happen." And wow. I think that attitude really stuck with me right to the point that when I was arriving at my last year of university, I was deciding for myself, like, what type of life do I want to lead? I already had a job. I had all my family and my friends in Australia. And I said, I'm just not feeling it. I'm not feeling like this is as much as there is. I think there is a lot more that the world can offer me and that I can offer the world. And so I packed it all up. I went to America with nothing, no friends, no family, no job. And, it was tough. It's a tough thing to do, to be able to fully trust yourself, to be able to make that kind of leap. But if you can do that for yourself, then I think it unlocks an enormous amount of opportunity and potential for yourself.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting that you said that you were able to trust yourself. What made you be able to do that?
I think really it comes down to one very simple philosophy, and that's every single success that I've achieved in my life has not been because I'm particularly special or talented. It's been because I just get on and do something. And it's something I've intrinsically noticed about not only myself, but a lot of other people, is we often get caught up in this idea of thinking a particular situation through too much that it paralyzes us. Whereas I think the more accurate way to lead your life is you have a certain amount of decisions, right? At any point in time, you have a certain amount of decisions. Make a decision that is right with yourself, your conscience, and just go for it. And then when you make that decision, and then you'll have a new branch of decisions, and then you make that decision at that point. So for me, what I was thinking when I was coming to America was, okay, so let's say I go to America, and even if I completely fail and cannot get a job, all I will have to do is drag myself back to Australia. And I'll be at the exact same point that I was when I left. So if that's my baseline, being exactly the same, and obviously the flip side of that is if I was successful, which I think I'm certainly on the right track with it now in America, then all of that upside is now available to me. So I think that's an important thing to understand, is that you can get on and do an action, because at the end of the day, the worst case scenario often isn't that bad, but the best case scenario, you often under anticipate how good it could be to do something like that for yourself.
Yeah, and I think that makes sense, because I think mavericks have an innate belief in themselves that other people, conformists, don't have, and often accuse Mavericks of being arrogant. And I think it's just that, thinking, you know what, I'm going to be all right. Because you could just trust that whatever, it's almost like being a cat, and you just know no matter how high you are, you're going to land on your feet and it doesn't matter.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with that analogy more. I like to phrase it slightly differently of trusting the process, that if you have a direction that you're aiming for and you have the steps in place, then you just need to trust that process. It might not pay off in 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, but give it enough time and it will pay off for you. The first couple of years, there were a few doubts for me of, was this the right decision? But now where I'm sitting 3.5 years in, I'm making 3 times what I would be if I would stayed in Australia. I've been mentioned in different publications like Forbes, which I never would have imagined was possible before. And now it's a thriving, vibrant community of friends, networks, and really I noticed for myself when I went back to Australia for the first time in that 3 years last April, and I noticed that it felt like a trip abroad. America feels like home for me now. And that was a fundamental shift in my mindset to see that, wow, even in this relatively short space of 3 years, how much personal growth I'd achieved and how much personal growth wouldn't have been achieved had I not adopted that Maverick mindset to just go for it.
I'm interested, actually, in your head. It's like a weird question, but in your head, do you have any kind of negative chit chat going on, or is it just like empty?
No. I think we all have negative chit chat. The key is to understand where that's coming from, and usually it's coming from our primitive brains. Where, let's take ourselves back to when we were on the, African savannah. If, we stepped outside of the social group, then maybe we'd be eaten by a cheetah or something like that. Mm-hmm. And so often the case of when you get that negative chit chat is it's your brain's way of making you play small because it's worried for you. Now, the funny thing is that may have worked when our lives were actually in danger, but right now, particularly for us in, Western democracies, we are very safe. And so when it comes down to that fear, it's really just a fear of what others are thinking of us. And I always say to that, well, you are the only person who spends 100% of the time with yourself and with your own thoughts. So why would you put stock in what someone else thinks of you? Because they're not going to be the recipients of the full 100% consequences of your decisions. And by the same token, if you're spending all your time thinking about what others are thinking of you, surely then you should think that they are probably spending all their time thinking of what others are thinking of them. So in that way, I think yes, there is always going to be negative chit chat for all of us, but you need to once you understand where it comes from, then you are able to almost disassociate yourself from it and realize, look, thank you, primitive brain, for trying to have my back, but I don't need you in this instance.
That's interesting. The reason I asked is because I don't have a lot of negative chit chat in my head, but I know that when I was younger, I worked hard at decluttering that. So I don't have a critical voice that I know other people have that say, you can't do this, it's not possible. But it does mean that, like you said, there's clarity when there is some negative, because it's almost like it's a foreigner in your head, and it's like, where does that come from? And then you more like assess as to why, and then you can go down and say, okay, this is because it's self-protective, or this is because I am really frightened of this. But because you don't have that much negativity in your brain, it's easy to trace those kind of errant thoughts. Or maybe I'm just weird. I don't know.
No, not at all. I think that it does take a lot of practice, because obviously our minds are trained to prioritize negative over positive. There's an interesting thing in terms of motivation. They've found, psychologically speaking, that if you give a human the promise of a future reward, that doesn't motivate them as much as a fear of a loss from their current state. And that, in many ways, I think embodies that dichotomy between positive and negative, is that, we are wired, at least instinctively, to start from the negative. And yet, if we can, adopting things like your mindset and doing that work in order to be more positive and being able to know that, yes, you do have the potential to do whatever you want, that can unlock an enormous amount of opportunity for you where you wouldn't get if you're embracing that scarcity mindset of, I can't do this, or I don't want to step outside the social bounds, or, what will my family think of me? What will my friends think of me?
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. And I think I wonder whether Mavericks are different in the sense of where the priority is. Because I know that, for example, a lot of Mavericks that I've worked with are motivated by the reward, because Mavericks can stand a lot of pain. So being motivated by the negative doesn't tend to work, because you can stand in the fire for a long time before you think it's too hot. Whereas if you're motivated by the potential reward, that's something that you can strive for, because Mavericks tend to like the novel, the challenge, the let's make it the hardest thing possible. Otherwise, it's no point in doing it.
Absolutely. I think it's also that having that abundant mindset versus that scarcity mindset, and more importantly, an abundant long-term mindset. I think Maverick trust that if you're in the game, if you've got skin in the game for long enough and you're doing the right things, it'll work out. Whereas too many others are worried about, well, what's the short-term impact going to be to me? And the funny thing is that short-term impact is usually not as bad as you think it will be. And the payoff, if you can stay in the game long enough, is enormous. But I think there's certainly a predisposition in a lot of people to go towards comfort. And that's exactly what everyone told me. They said, well, why do you want to go to America? You've already got a job. All your family's here. Your whole friend networks are here. Why are you wanting to give all that up? And it's like, well, it's just comfortable. And more importantly, it's stagnation. And if there's one thing I fear more than anything, it's stagnation, because I'm not growing. And so, yes, it was a step to the side, if not a slight step back when I first came here. But then it was, a half step back to take 3 steps forward. It just made sense.
And I know that sometimes I come across Mavericks who aren't happy, and they're not happy because they've kind of managed to subdue their Maverick nature. So according to everybody else, they're successful, they're doing well, but it's kind of like a mask, because underneath it all, they're not challenged, they've lost their passion, don't know what they're going on. And I wonder whether, if you're not a Maverick, do you think that you would become more fulfilled and happy if you became more Maverick in your nature?
Oh, now that's a good question. I think, honestly, I think it is a balance. I think, like, the great thing about being a Maverick is that you're always pushing yourself to challenge yourself, and go after, that next, what everyone says is an unattainable goal, but because you have that mindset that you end up attaining it. I think probably the number one thing Mavericks there have to watch themselves is that they're not giving themselves the space to practice gratitude for the things they achieve. Because I know this, people around me will often say, oh, wow, that's wonderful that you did that. And I'm already on to the next thing, because I'm like, well, that task is completed. Great. It's successful. Time to move on to the next thing. And that, I think, is probably the one thing I struggle with the most, and have had to be a little bit more intentional about, even though, like, things like, meditation, never have come particularly naturally to me, at least in the traditional sense of sitting down in a quiet room.
Yeah.
I once told people that what I like to do is take a quiet walk at like 11 o'clock at night, and I sit and I walk with my thoughts. And people said, well, that's a form of meditation. And I was taken aback. I was like, oh, well, I didn't think that was meditation. I just thought that was organizing my thoughts. But there you go. But just giving myself that space to take stock of it, because and it might sound cliche, but enjoying the parts of the journey, because there is a lot of fulfillment there to be gained in the pursuit of a goal, not just the achievement of that goal. But I think that's something, perhaps if I didn't have the Maverick mindset, I would be more content with the achievements that I got, rather than quickly moving on to the next one.
Yeah, but I think that makes a lot of sense, because Mavericks hate steady state. They can live with steady state for like when they're resting, but then something else needs to happen. And I think that could be quite, it can lead to burnout if you're not careful, and it can lead to restlessness in the workplace, or if you're more of an extreme Maverick, the need to destroy something so that you can come along and fix it because you've become bored.
Yeah, totally. And I think this kind of comes back to your earlier point, Judith, that you have to spend the time with yourself to fully understand yourself. And taking, I always say to people that like self-awareness is the best trait that you can ever develop in yourself, because it'll lead to success. Because if you can fully understand how you're coming across both to your own mind as well as to everyone around you, well, that is an enormous opportunity for you to go, okay, here's who I am, here's what I stand for, and here's what I'm trying to achieve. That is an enormously clear message that you're putting out to the world, as opposed to a lot of people who, like you said about masks, they're showing, a certain facade to one aspect of their life. Maybe it's work, and then a different one at the home, and then a different one with their friends. And that just ends up with convolution, because no one really understands, well, who are you? What do you represent?
And I think it's, I think one thing that surprises people the most with Mavericks is the fact that Mavericks are very comfortable on their own, being unique and going against the flow, because there's no desire to fit in, as that's the most important thing. Because like a Maverick will trust, they'll seek other opinions, but they'll trust the rigor of their own decisions, so they won't become uncomfortable with those, and that can cause conformists some sort of concern.
No, absolutely. I think that's actually a really important point to touch on, that I think a lot of people could learn from that aspect of Mavericks, because I see so many people who get themselves in situations where they're not so comfortable, they're not trusting their gut instinct. That's the funny thing about the gut. When your gut tells you something's right or something is wrong, it is 99 times out of 100 like the right way that you should be going, and you should listen to that. But so many people, because of society, family, friends, whatever, decide not to trust that instinctive response. And like you say, Mavericks just know, well, I'm going to trust that because this is what my body or my mind is telling me to do.
Yeah, so listening to you reminded me of something. I was on a course a few years ago, learning some various techniques, and we had to go to exercise, and then we had to give feedback. And I knew the person who was, who was the facilitator, the teacher, so I knew them quite well. Anyway, so on the feedback, my feedback was, this particular exercise is okay, but what I do is better for this, to get the same result. This technique takes too long. My one's way better. And then this guy, and the teacher was like, yeah, okay, that's fine. And this other guy was really horrified. He was absolutely upset. He was incensed. He was like, red in the face. And he said, I can't believe you just said that. And I said, I don't understand. What's the problem? And he said, everybody here in this room has said that this is like the bee's knees is the best thing since sliced bread, and you sit there and say what you have is better. How could you do that? And I'm like, and I just said to him, but it's true. I don't see. And he goes, but everybody else thinks you're wrong. And I said, but you're assuming that your opinion, I value that more than I value my own, and I don't. And it wasn't about being arrogant or annoyed. It was, in fact, I thought it was quite surprising because he had no perspective on what I was saying was better and had not asked for it.
That's fascinating. Because it's, again, this is that facts don't care about your feelings. It's just, this is the truth for me, and who cares if it doesn't align with the rest of you? It's like, if I found a way that works better for me than what you're proposing, why would I not trust that? Why would I go along with what you guys are all saying just purely because a certain proportion of people are saying it?
And I think that's what was upsetting him. It wasn't that I was saying that for that particular technique, I could do it better. It was the fact that I wasn't agreeing with the majority. And it was that was upsetting him, not whether I was right or wrong. It was just, but everybody else has this different opinion. Who are you to stand up against the majority? And I just thought that was absolutely fascinating. And when I spoke to the facilitator, I said, what did you think about that, my comment? And he said, well, I know you, so if you think you're a bit better, it probably was. I was like, okay. because it wasn't like I was saying all of it is rubbish. I was just saying this particular exercise, and I think it's like a difference between coaching and mentoring, and you can do both, but some circumstances call for something different. And in my experience, Mavericks prefer mentoring, because if they want to know something, they want to go to someone who knows the answer and tells them what they need to do to get there. And then once they've got there, they might be interested in coaching us to see how they can change their mindset. But coaching in itself can take longer than mentoring, because it's not a transfer of knowledge, it's a particular style of questioning.
Yeah, no, you make a good point there with coaching, is that coaching tends to fall into certain tracks, if you will, certain neural pathways, if you will, and what works, in one way might not work in another way, whereas mentoring takes that slightly step back approach while still giving you the freedom and flexibility to operate in a way that is most akin to who you are as a person. Because that, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter how we get to the goal we want, as long as we get there in a way that is, in alignment with, ourselves and our values. That's really, all that matters. Yeah. So it doesn't quite make sense to just follow a particular path just because this person said so.
Yeah, and I think with Mavericks as well, they're in a hurry. So they'll prefer to go to somebody who has experience in getting them to the place they want to be, rather than, say, a coaching perspective where that person may not be an expert in what you want. They're expert in something else, but not necessarily what you're looking to do. That's not the same. It's just I found in terms of a subset of people, in terms of Mavericks, they want to get to point B quickly, and they want to go there with someone who's been there, or point the pathway there.
Yeah, it makes 100% sense, in the sense that if that person has been there, then they're going to have that intimate knowledge, as opposed to, like you say, a coach who might only know certain aspects, and maybe they'll be like 20% helpful to you. But like you say, a Maverick wants someone who's 100% helpful to them.
Yeah, and somebody that would challenge them and will hold them up to, to the right sort of standard. Because I've found that Mavericks love to be challenged by somebody they respect.
Well, I would argue that someone who challenges you in a way automatically earns that respect by the nature of that, because they're not pandering to you, right? I've actually found this, funnily enough, with my bosses here in America, where a lot of my American coworkers have always been surprised that I talk very candidly to my bosses, and I speak to them as equals rather than speaking up to them. And the funny thing is, by doing that, I've noticed that I garner more respect and accelerate through the hierarchies far quicker, because I'm not coming from a position of subjugation. I'm saying, like, you're a person, I'm a person. This is what my expertise tells us we should do in this situation. You may disagree with me, but I'm going to tell you how it is. And if you say we should do a particular direction or a particular initiative, and I think it's, quite frankly, a load of, I'm going to tell you as such.
Yeah, I think peers speak to each other like that, and I think subconsciously people pick up on that.
Yeah, absolutely. It was really funny. I think my very first boss was at a finance company, and she gave me enormous privilege and extra opportunities because I didn't speak to her as if I was a subordinate. And to me, it was funny seeing that from the perspective of, I just wouldn't have spoken to anyone in any other way. Like, I'm not being disrespectful to the fact that she's senior to me. I'm just saying, well, you are a human, I am a human. I've got more expertise in this particular area, so I'm going to tell you what that expertise dictates.
Yeah, and I think it can work both ways. I'm very much like you. I've always called, managers by their first name because that's their name. I remember working in an organisation when I was quite young, but also quite senior, and it was a retail organisation, and I was the only senior manager, that allowed the staff to call them by their first name. And I actually got taken aside by my boss, who told me I was being inappropriate. And I was really horrified. I was like, what do you mean I'm being inappropriate? Like, first managerial job and everything. Like, what's going on? And they said, yeah, your staff call you by the first name. And I'm like, yeah. And they're going, well, they should call you Miss. I was like, why? And I was like saying, could they not show me respect? And I'm like, I'm the HR manager. They must be able to come and talk to me without any of this kind of stuff. And it was almost like the other managers were using their title to garner respect rather than their character and how they acted.
No, I couldn't agree with that more. I mean, respect is earned. It is not bestowed through a title. I always like to, even though obviously manager is a title that gets used a lot, I always like to say that we need more leaders and less managers, because if you unpack those terms, like, a manager to me is someone who's running an adult daycare, whereas a leader is investing in their people, finding the ways that supports them to achieve their goals that will ultimately align with whatever organization they're working for. Because, yeah, you don't get respect by just being called Miss or Mister. You earn respect because of how you treat people.
Yes, exactly. Okay, I think that's a really good place to stop, actually. Patrick, would you come back again?
Oh, absolutely. I've had an awesome time. Thank you so much, Judith, for having me. It's been wonderful.
Yeah, it's been a really good conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you once again for tuning into the Maverick Paradox podcast. I hope you have enjoyed listening to my conversation with Patrick as much as I enjoyed having it. If you'd like to learn more about Mavericks and leadership, then please subscribe to my podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, or one of the other popular podcast platforms. Alternatively, you can apply to join the Maverick Paradox exclusive Facebook group, and my website is maverickparadox.com. Find out how willful independence can ultimately change all our futures. Thanks again, and see you soon.